You know, we have keys to 3 houses. You know what I'm saying? It's like Miss Linnell, I got Linnell, I had Leslie's, I haven't got Josh, and I got Ben and Mindy's next door. And in the past, before she died, it's like, we're going to be there to help if, you know, something happens.
And there's people you get involved with, you can never be tired, and that you can never avoid, because you don't really know what's going to happen.
Right.
Like with Miss Mary, she called 3 or 4 people, they didn't answer. Well, that's her lifeline if something's wrong, you know.
Yeah. And she has a cell phone,
she does,
so she was able to call even if her landline or something.
Yeah. And she didn't have a landline. Mm-hmm. And she doesn't like calling Patsy and I, but she always does, because...
Y'all are her last resort.
Well, yeah.
She can't get anybody else. Is it family she's calling?
She's got neighbors that are really helpful, but she didn't get them on the line. And her family, most of the family that she does have, is a generation younger, I think, now. And so they, you know how that is. You don't know your family. She knows who they are, but they really don't know who she is.
Yeah.
And
or they don't want to know.
Yeah, and that happens too.
To me, that's the saddest part. They don't, you know. They say 3 generations up or down. So I was thinking, I had my great grandmother, my granny, my mom and daddy, and then me. I would have never, I mean, I was not nearly as close to my granny, but I knew her and I loved her. And if she needed me, she could have called me, even though she died when I was like 22.
Yeah.
You know, but she was in my life till I was 22.
Right.
But I was much closer to my granny, you know, than my mom, than me.
Yeah.
And now going the other way, it would be Mama, me, and Chase now, or me, Chase, and Destiny. But I can see it already, even with my grandkids. They're not interested in us.
Yeah, generational families lost really in our culture, and we're in the South where it matters.
Yeah.
You know, but it's really disappeared in my lifetime, and it's because kids used to stay close.
We were talking about
but
that.
then we're all scattered.
Yeah, cousins don't know each other. That's like when we were growing up, we were with our cousins every weekend at Granny's.
Well, there's
or even at Pete Mildred's.
Yeah.
I always grew up with their cousins.
There's 7 of us. 3 of us are local together. But if Robert didn't come to church, I would never see him. My sister's in Walker. I don't hardly go through Walker anymore from where I'm at, and so it's just, and there's just no intentionality about, because it's easy to pick up the phone, and you know, you can even. It's just,
let's just put on the happy face on Facebook.
Yeah, you better put on a happy face, or somebody's gonna pounce on you these days.
Yeah, I saw Destry
roll their eyes and OMG and
Destry removed something. I saw him because he's been putting some funny stuff here lately. He said, "Just letting y'all know I'm taking some of this down because I was not meaning to be controversial.
I did the same thing. I posted.
He posted something about Roe versus Wade
and set off a fire.
I posted an article, and it was just information, but it came from the wrong source according to this person, and lit into me. I said, that is not even why I did this. It's just information, and it was about the developmental.
Because he don't like the source, or the wrong.
They didn't like the source because it's just
That's just you don't like it.
Yeah. And if you read the article, it cited the base source of everything. You just had to dig down and read it all, and that's where I found that article about brain and psychological and emotional development in adolescence that I posted later, because we just assume that they're grown up once they hit junior high now. When did that happen? I wasn't grown up until I was 30. Somebody hit me in the head and said, "Grow up, boy."
I'm still not.
I don't feel it.
It's like, okay, when I want to throw down, I'm just smart enough to know that I can't throw down and cry.
As Tim was getting older, Daddy told me, he said, "Baby, he's got a long way to go." He said, he's a guy. He said they start kind of coming awake around 23, and they start, they drop their mouth and they look around and they go, "It's a world around."
Yeah, I got to get busy.
And 25, they kind of, they're kind of coming to terms with things, and around 30, they're like, "Okay, I need to be a man."
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a problem with believing all that and knowing that, but you know what? when you go read scripture, that has not all, we've just gotten a lot smarter. We think we know that Mary was 14 to 16 years old when she had the Savior of the world. So you can't tell me that God looked down and decided, oh,
Yeah.
she's not smart enough, she can't handle this.
No, I don't think it's always been that kind of developmental lag. I think we've created it in a lot of
I
ways.
think our
And
environment
the way
and
that
our-
we raise our children and the things
Yeah.
that we do and that kind of stuff, and now they don't,
Yeah.
you know,
We-
they need to be playing with baby dolls when they're in junior high still, you know, but they don't.
Yeah.
They're watching shoot 'em up games or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just
It's
ridiculous.
it's things we do, and the more they find out that your environment can change your genes, this kind of stuff just gets carried further and further along. You can change them back, but it's still a
Well,
reality
that's what
that
Jared was telling me about trauma, and I have never, that if a woman is pregnant and is traumatized, that traumatic gene or whatever's going on
Yeah.
in the woman, I'm thinking trauma's here, but whatever's happening here can be transferred to the baby,
yeah.
and that when the baby can be born and will start exhibiting traumatized situations. And I'm like, wow. I mean, it was crazy.
I tell you, I learned more about that through that Conquer series we did with our men here on pornography, because it goes into it
Well, it
in
talks
pretty good
about
detail and talks about how
How even
those the sensory
uh,
aspect of that changes your genes, and you pass that along.
well, I can tell
and
you
to
right
the
now,
next
that's probably
generation.
90% of my poor oldest son, because I was so traumatized the whole time I was married to his father. I'm thinking, because I always like you were both my boys. You know, I don't care what's happening. You might be in Myers. He's always been jealous of Stephen. Gotten better now that they've gotten older. But it's like you still have half of me flowing through you. So I hear this,
Yeah.
and I would be like, oh, I raised them. I tried to raise them identical. And Chase, like I tell him, you have no excuse. He was 5 or 6 when we met Roger, but he was almost 8 when we got married. And so it's like, all right, son,
Yeah.
he's been your dad for
Yeah.
30 something.
Yeah.
And you were afforded the same privileges.
But there was a shaping, like you said.
Well, no.
Yeah.
When I go back, I think at 4 years old, you know, he watched his father beat Sniper,
Yeah.
and he's throwing all his clothes out the back. And I'm thinking, okay, that 4-year-old was traumatized.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
they're seeing and hearing all that. They are. They can become very
And I was
traumatized.
smart enough even then to get him into counseling, but.
All right. We're going to look at chapter 20.
Very much.
Uh,
We have these things in bad.
So this entire story with Abimelech, when we look at it on the surface, looks to be the same as what happened in Egypt with Abraham when he went into Egypt and said, "Oh, I'm just going to tell everybody you're my sister, so they won't kill me," because he was afraid for his life. And of course, we know what happened there. The Pharaoh sends for Sarai, and plagues break out in Egypt. Okay, and evidently it affects the whole country. And so I guess the way that the Pharaoh dealt with that was, well, the only thing that's new that's happened in my life recently is the arrival of this man's sister into my household. But because of the plagues, somehow or another determines that it's his wife. Now, we're never offered a conversation with God and the Pharaoh, or that how he comes to these revelations. We just know that he does. And the result is that Abram becomes rich in the process, and Sarai's returned to him, and we still have intact the promise that God has made to the two of them. Now we're in the story with Abimelech, and it says that from there, and where they are is, let's see. Well, that's Lot's the last thing that we looked at. So he's still, that would be, I'm trying to think of where they were, but that would have been in the wilderness there along the Dead Sea. And so they head back to the Negev, which is south. So Abraham from there traveled to the region of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur, where he's been before. While he was staying there in Gerar, Abraham said about his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." So Abimelech is the king of the city of Gerar. It's not a country so much as it is another city-state that we're dealing with. Yeah.
It was like
If
we
you
were-
ran the
we were
town, you were
Bingo,
king.
We were
Yeah,
be
instead of a
mayors
mayor,
than
they
a
were
king.
Yeah. So King Abimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him. But God came to Abimelech. This is where this gets to be different than the previous encounter. God never comes to the Pharaoh. He just strikes plagues upon him. So God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are about to die because of the woman you have taken, for she is a married woman." And what we have, the word married there actually means she is ruled over, or she belongs to a husband.
And what translation? Because my ESV just says she is a man's wife.
That's
Yeah.
what I have the ESV.
The literal translation would be, and she is possessed by a man, or she is possessed by a husband. So this idea of marriage, we kind of get a glimpse as to what's going on here, and how God values this, at least in light of the promise that He's made to them, that this is not just a union of two that no man can put asunder. There is a possession that is being described here. Why is that important at this stage of the game?
Because she's supposed to be the mother of all nations.
That's right.
Yeah, he doesn't
That's
want-
right.
The same promise was to
He
her.
doesn't want
and
his
was given-
son, he wants
Yeah.
Abraham's son.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a security that we overlook in the modern world. We don't want to think about our wives as being the possession of husbands. But what it actually is describing here is that she is secure in her relationship with Abraham. This is something that cannot be broken. This is kind of like a legal contract. You're fooling around with things that are beyond just building a harem.
And it's still supposed to be that way as far as
As marriage. Yeah.
It should be that way.
Yeah. The
Well,
man
at this
should be the
point,
protector.
She's still
Yeah.
pretty old, isn't she?
Well, that's what I keep wondering.
She's got to be really
But
pretty.
She's
they
got to
said
be in her
she was
90s.
Beautiful though.
Yeah.
But they said
Yeah,
she was.
she's
Her-
got to be really pretty.
Her
for
beauty
them to
didn't
take
fade
interest.
even in her old age.
Yeah.
Because she keeps talking about how old she is, and I'm thinking, well, this guy wants her for his harem. she
Yeah,
must
so
she must be a very
She
attractive
may be out
90-year-old.
there looking-
Yeah, I know it does kind of. I kept
And
that kept coming to
Abraham
mind.
Had enough, foresight to realize she's beautiful. So I'm going to say you're my sister, so he
yeah.
don't kill me to try to get you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the only thing I can think of. But I
Now,
don't know. She got to be pretty old.
now when we get to this, he's not so much fearful. We're gonna kind of compare those things in a moment as well. Let's go on in verse 3. It says, "But God came to Abimelech." So God is showing up in a way that He hasn't shown up against those that might come against Abraham. And He said, "You're about to die because of this woman you have taken, for she's a married woman." And this, "for you are about to die," we quickly find out, has greater implications to Abimelech than just Abimelech. So he says, now Abimelech had not approached her, and I want to look at that word.
I'm thinking he hadn't
He hadn't fooled with her yet.
had
Yeah.
anything with her at that point.
Yeah, I want to see what my computer's so slow these days. I had to redo my whole computer the other day.
Everybody's going through that. Something's going on.
Something happened with Windows. It just destroyed my computer. I had to go back to 10, and then I had to redo a bunch of stuff. To approach her means to get up, to come closer. Approach, to come forward. It literally means as close as your innards are to you. Okay, so this was it was definitely a sexual thing to be that close. So he had not approached her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy a nation even though it is innocent?" So we've kind of got the same kind of question that Abraham was asking about Sodom and Gomorrah. Will you destroy the whole city, even the innocent that is with it? But it also foreshadows us to the whole episode with Isaac, just a little bit following this. Is God willing to destroy the whole promise that he's made to Abraham, along with the innocence of Isaac. So the theme here gets to be kind of rich for us, because now everyone is interested in justice, and they're interested in God's justice. How does God perform as a just God in the world? And so he's asking that question, would you destroy a nation? And God has already said, you're going to die. So Abimelech has extended his entire existence to his own people and saying, are you going to destroy us all? If you destroy me, you're going to destroy us all. And later, it's even fleshed out even more. So he says, didn't he himself say to me, she is my sister? And she herself said, he is my brother. I did this with a clear conscience and clean hands. So Abimelech is claiming innocence. So he wants to be treated as innocent.
Rightly so.
Yeah, right.
He's right in claiming his innocence.
Yeah. Yeah. So before, there's with the whole deal in Egypt, it's kind of the same thing. The Pharaoh doesn't know, but God immediately strikes him with plagues, as if the only way for an Egyptian to hear what God has to say is through pain and suffering. Here we have Abimelech, and for whatever reason, God is able to converse with him in this dream and talk about these pretty weighty issues. Then God said to him in the dream, yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience. I have also kept you from sinning against me. So God is saying what here? I've intervened to the point of saving your life.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did not let you touch her. So, I mean,
Yeah.
if Abimelech wanted to, God put something there. Not you too tired tonight. No, dude, it's not going to happen tonight. Whatever. God said, no, you're not touching her. Yeah.
So we find out right away that God doesn't set anyone up. He's not set up to sin, and therefore set up to receive the wrath of God, so to speak.
He's giving him a way out.
Yeah.
Is what he's doing, because he still had freedom of choice at that point. He could have chosen to not listen to that dream, but he didn't. He had enough, I guess, belief in God that he didn't want to push that.
Sounds like grace to me.
Yeah.
Exercised in faith.
Yeah.
There's this huge foreshadowing that's going on here, where we find it not just in the New Testament with Christ, of course, but we begin to find it in the Isaac story almost immediately. And so we do find in this that God is willing to treat everybody with grace and mercy. We've seen it now in Sodom and Gomorrah. We've seen it now in this episode. We'll see it again in the Isaac episode, and we begin to now see it over and over again. But it's not just for Abraham and his people. It's for the world, which is exactly what God said Abraham's life would mean. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet. First time we've seen this word. Okay. A prophet is, let's see what. A prophet is best understood as that person that is speaking for God. Okay.
The Old Testament, they said, thus said the Lord.
Yeah, that's right. So he's a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. Okay? So now there's a relationship of life that these two share together. He's going to do what he knows his conscience is clear. He's laid it out plainly. You return the woman, and you will not die. And my prophet, Abraham, is going to pray, and you will live. So God's promise before is attached to Abraham's prayer, Abraham's intercession. Now we're back to when God called Abram, he said, go where I tell you to go and be a blessing to the nation. This is a little microcosm of that grander thing that God has at work. You were about to sin. I've shown you my grace, and we're going to seal it up, okay, with this promise that I've made to Abram that, by the way, is also available to you. But if you do not return her, and there's the free will part that God is speaking of, know that you will certainly die, you and all who are yours. And so Abimelech knew from the beginning, if I mess up with this one that's speaking to me in my dream, I've brought it on everybody, you know. So we find there's this connectedness with God and Abimelech through speech, and then God is going to connect Abimelech and Abram together through this prayer and through this long explanation that is given about why all this came about. So early in the morning, Abimelech got up, called his servants together, and personally told them all these things, and the men were terrified.
Yeah, because they were going to be the dead ones too.
They were going to be the dead ones too. I'm sure they were saying, hey, boss, you need to send the woman back.
Everybody quick.
Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, what have you done to us? How did I sin against you that you have brought such enormous guilt on me and on my kingdom? So he's recognizing, he's stating at least that he's guilty, but he's already, the conversation with God is that he had a clear conscience and clean hands about all of this. So he really isn't guilty. But the implication here is Abram had done such a thing to create guilt upon him. So here we find again, Abram's the one that's causing the problem. Yet again. Yeah.
And to me, that's not having enough faith in God, because he's not trusting God to protect him. Even though Sarah's that beautiful, he's promised a whole nation for you, between you and your wife. Why would you think he's not going to protect you from this king?
And he goes on to say his excuses in 11, what I thought you were going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no fear of God here. They're going to kill me.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. But he had enough fear, because in a dream he talked with God and said, I'm sending her back.
Right. So once again, Abram is believing by half. He believes just enough for his security, but he doesn't believe enough when it's risky. And we've seen this now a few times. When we get to the Isaac story, we see that that's melted away. Okay, he trusts God even in the midst of that crisis, and we find a new Abram at the end of that whole thing. It's a whole new Abraham. But here we're reminded of the old Abraham. That I trust God when I'm secure, but when I get in these places where I'm not so secure, or I can't identify God's security for me, I'll fall back on my old ways that have proven actually to make me pretty well off. It may be that he was going to rely on the hospitality nature of the wandering people. Hospitality was a big deal. Maybe he knew that, hey, I do this and I'll get a bunch of stuff again. I don't know. But we know for certain that he's not trusting God the way that God would expect him to trust him.
I'm ready for you to get to the verses where he's still making excuses.
Yeah, we're getting there. So Abraham replied, I thought there is absolutely no fear of God in this place. Terrible assumption. God's been speaking with this guy.
Yeah,
okay,
I just told him God spoke to me, and he was saying,
So he's just got some terrible presuppositions going on here. They will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister. That's the worst. She's really the daughter of my father, though not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife. So I see. Can you imagine this conversation? These two grown men standing there, and he's saying, "What have you done?" Well, nothing really. I mean, she really is kind of my sister. She's kind of my wife.
Here's God saying, "Don't touch this dude," and he heard from God. And here's the guy saying, "Yeah." It's like he's probably wondering, "Okay, God, you're telling me that I'm not to touch him. and here he is, a wimp.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
supposed
Yeah.
to be a prophet and
Yeah.
pray for me. I don't want
Yeah.
him praying
Yeah.
for me now.
Yeah, yeah.
He's willy-nilly on the sister thing.
Yeah.
So he's talked Sarah into going along with this everywhere they go.
Yeah, she's never said no, apparently.
Yeah, yeah. And so the whole thing is just kind of Abram. He is all about Sarah being his wife when there's the promise from God, and he's all about Sarah being his sister when he feels threatened by someone else. So his faith is by half. His interest in what God is doing is really focused in one area and is not even available in this other area of his life. Now we do that often about things. We especially do it when we do get in trouble. We want the full measure of God going before us. We want to be with Elisha where the angels appear, all at once, and that's what we're looking for when we're in trouble.
And then when he does do something miraculous, we're so fickle, we're done with it in 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's like,
So we, like Abraham, we always have much to learn about the way that we're going to trust in God. And also, we often think that if those that are in some sort of way that may be opposing us or be a threat to us, we automatically assume that God is against them and that he's only for us. And this shows us that that's not true about God. God loves everybody, and he has an interest in no one sinning. He has very little interest, it seems, to show his wrath upon people until they come about doing something that's going to threaten his program. Okay, so when he was bringing the people out of his people out of slavery, and these nations come against them, he has no interest in those pagan people and trying to resolve them of their sin. He's got a program in place for his people.
And don't you think even today Jerusalem is still part of that? I mean, Israel is still part of that program.
Yes.
That's why we
Yeah.
see what we see. It's still, he said it, and he hasn't changed his
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. If you woke up tomorrow and there had been a great movement in the people of Israel and they had become believers in Jesus Christ, we don't know what the world would be like.
They could conquer.
Yeah.
Because he's already proven, even in modern day, I always think about my tour guide when they were about to die and they saw the missile turn around and blow up the tank, and that was in 19 whatever.
Yes.
5-day war, 6-day war.
6-day war.
He's still doing the miraculous.
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
For
They
his people
explode
in Israel.
just over Israel. They don't even
make
hit
it
Israel. They explode
in
in
the
the
air.
air.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
They
like, but why can y'all not see this?
don't- touch not
Yeah,
God's people.
it's just crazy how.
Then
it is.
Abimelech took flocks and herds and male and female slaves, gave them to Abraham, and returned his wife to him. And Abimelech said, "Look, my land is before you. Settle wherever you want." And he said to Sarah, "Look, I am giving your brother," it doesn't call him his
Yeah,
her husband.
That kind of, I think, was a dig.
Yeah. Well, it tells you a little bit about where Abimelech is operating from.
yeah. He's
It was the husband that had lied to him.
Yeah.
See? So he's having nothing to do with the liar.
Yeah.
He's only going to deal with this at the most base level. He's not going to elevate Abraham at all.
Yeah,
And I don't blame him.
you're not gonna make me look worse than I already do.
Right.
Yeah,
He's already proven I don't want nothing to do with this dude.
yeah.
Yeah.
Then he says, "Look, I'm giving your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It's a verification of your honor to all who are with you. You are fully vindicated," meaning that I'm giving 1,000 pieces of silver as a testimony that I did not touch you.
I wonder how much that's worth today. I mean, back then.
Back then,
I mean, now it'd be worth. I mean, silver's way up there, but I just makes
Yeah.
you wonder how valuable when it says 1,000 pieces, so everyone will know it's your honor.
yeah. I'm trying to remember how many pieces of silver was promised Haman I mean, Haman. I think it was 30,000. Anyway, it was represented more than half of the treasury at the time. So 1,000.
So.
Yeah. So 1,000 pieces of silver was a lot of great wealth. Yeah. And so he's really given testimony that her honor is worth that to him. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves, so they could bear children. Where'd that come from? For the Lord had completely closed the wombs in Abimelech's household on account of Sarah.
So this had to go on for a little while for them
That's
to
what
know
I'm
that.
thinking.
They had to at least know a couple of months.
Yeah.
That there were no women popping up pregnant or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So this had to go on for a while because they knew that the wombs had been closed.
That's right.
So Abraham and Sarah and Abimelech were hanging around together. He was dwelling, I guess, in his land. Wow.
So the two stories are quite different because in one, we see that God, the first story, God is just securing Abraham and the promise. And the promise is made to Sarah. Here he's doing much, much more. We see so much more of God's character in this story than we do in the first story.
Yeah.
And we see how Abraham is being brought into what God is doing in a way that's outside of his own household, so that he's praying and he's offering a word of God. And so all that becomes important as we look at it and we see a progression that Abraham is moving on. And had to happen because now we're at the most important part of his whole story, and that is the birth of Isaac. And we're going to take it's 6:56. Let's see. I'm in no hurry if y'all aren't. Let's see. We might get down to.
I mean, I'm not.
Let's see through 21. Let's see what we can do through that. It feels like we just kicked into high gear since the first 6 chapters of Genesis. We took so long working through the creation story. It says, so the Lord came to Sarah as he had said. Remember, they came when they went to Sodom and Gomorrah. It says, I'll be back in about a year. And so now we're at about a year. And the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age. At the appointed time God had told him. Abraham named his son who was born to him, the one Sarah bore to him, Isaac, which means laughter, because they both laughed. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God had commanded him. So now we could stop right there and say that everything is secure for the covenant promise because of this circumcision. Abram was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has made me laugh, and everyone who hears will laugh with me. She also said, who would have told Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son for him in his old age. So she is celebrating. She's, for so much of her existence, it hasn't been a lot to celebrate. She hasn't always been the kindest person in the world. She hasn't. She's rarely took God at face value, what he said. And finally, she's to this point now where there's a bit that she can celebrate, and it still hinges on Abraham. Who would have told Abraham that Sarah could do such a thing? What's missing here? God made her laugh, and that's all the credit God gets. You see that? Okay, a lot is going on here.
But she's not praising him for anything else.
Yeah.
Just the fact about a little woman having a baby.
So we see this. It's kind of It's kind of inward focused for Sarah still.
And we're going to see it again in the next few verses.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of see. So we think we've seen a repeat of the Egypt story. Now we're going to see another story of Hagar and Ishmael, and it's different than the previous one.
Repeat again,
Yeah. So the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham held a great feast on the day Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son mocking, the one Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham. So Ishmael's mocking who?
Isaac.
Must be Isaac.
Yeah, the baby having
Yeah.
a party.
She's
Probably Jim.
joking at him, you know, the little baby.
Probably being a big
Yeah.
brother.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, so it's interesting. The writer doesn't even want to say his name now. So she said to Abraham, "Drive out this slave with her son, for the son of this slave will not be a co-heir with my son Isaac." Well, she's already been told that's not the case.
Yeah, Isaac's
Okay.
the one.
So she's using the harshest penalty that she can think of to deal with this mocking little boy that's making fun of Isaac.
Well, that's kind of a mama bear. I'm sorry. Mama bear.
Well, we got to take a look
But
at that.
she's not walking with the Lord.
Yeah.
She's not trusting Him.
The very purpose of having a relationship with God is to overcome our own.
Yeah, I get that. I
Yeah.
get that. But she hadn't been that way up to this point, so why should she change now?
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, you would think after how many years? Yeah, it's been a few years.
Yeah, it's hard to change somebody at that point in time. You know, she's dealt with him this whole time like this.
Right.
She's never really trusted. She isn't giving him the glory a few verses before. You know, and now she's protective of her son. She's always been this way, so she's just going to continue to be
Yeah.
Sarah.
She's something like Abraham is with her when he gets threatened. Okay, I'm going to push my wife out there. She's going to be my protector instead of God being a protector. And here Sarah's going to, okay, I'm going to push the slave woman out of here,
Yeah.
and I'm going to be the protector of my son rather than God. And see this whole thing that we're approaching that great moment of Mount Moriah, and we find out that there's only one protector. There's only one person in charge, and it's not Sarah. It's not Abraham.
He protected them all.
And
Hagar
she-
and Ishmael.
Yeah,
She wouldn't have had Ishmael and Hagar to deal with if she had not done what she had done before.
right. That's right. So it just keeps boomeranging back.
Yeah.
So this was very distressing to Abraham because of his son. Still doesn't say his name. But God said to Abraham, "Do not be distressed about the boy and your slave. Whatever Sarah says to you, listen to her, because your offspring will be traced through Isaac. And I will make a nation of the slave's son because of your offspring." Of course, they trace, the Arabs trace their lineage back to Abraham as well. But God is interested in the child of the promise.
Do you think He's not mentioning the name? Because He's already given. Remember, He gave Hagar the promise, even when she was pregnant, go back home.
Yeah.
You know, let them take care of you. And He promised Hagar, and we're going to see here. And He's still
I
taking
think-
care of Hagar, but they're not mentioning Him.
Yeah. I think this is a literary device to show that there's the name child of the promise, Isaac, and then there's the boy. Okay. And it's for the reader's benefit to be able to experience what is happening.
And I was wondering too, like I said, literary at the time, names meant so much to people. So
Yes.
not even saying a name is probably the lowest thing you could do.
Yeah.
Because a name mattered.
And what was his name? The God who
It's-
hears.
Hears. Okay, yeah, because
Yeah.
she ends up known as the God who sees. But
Yeah.
Ishmael was the God who hears.
Yeah, the God who hears. And so, yeah, to not say that there's a way of removing that through words. You're removing Ishmael
Yeah.
from everything that Abraham is now. And so it's not the last time we see this in the Old Testament. It happens a lot, where the name is just lost all of a sudden, and we begin to wonder what happened to them. And lo and behold, this is what happens. They're removed, and after this, you don't hear anymore. It's over. This chapter is over, and everything that God says He's going to do for the slave, the boy, the slave, He does, because the Arab people became quite great, conquered His people. But for the Hebrew reading this, it's a way of saying, yeah, God is going to fulfill His promise, because He's removing all these other, what could very well be stumbling blocks for Abraham.
And aren't they still donkeys of men to this day?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
So I mean, even back then, he said before it would be.
And let's just speculate for a minute. How would the story of Isaac and the sacrifice had gone if Ishmael was still back in the tent? Well, if this happens, I'll just go back to Ishmael. We'll just do this over again until God gets it right. That would have been really the idea there.
They kept always trying to figure out how to do it, how to
Yeah.
hold on anyway.
Yeah, but Ishmael's gone. So now when God leads him up the mountain,
He has no choice.
and his only sacrifice to make is his own son, yeah, there's nowhere, at that point, there's nowhere to run. The excuses are all over for Abram at that point. And we've seen him build on several through this, and we've seen him kind of get away with it, and we've seen it, how it's been embarrassing and this, that, and the other. But when we get to this point, this is much deeper. This wasn't anything that God did to be mean or angry or to treat with favoritism toward Abraham. It was what had to be done so that the promise had its full meaning. There could not be another ever, because if there was another, then Jesus would not have. It would have never mattered.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
And so the big mistake that they made, God turns into a wonderful thing still.
Yeah, but He also, when He went to make that sacrifice, if He had not raised that knife, God would have known that He just did not have Abraham fully. I think Abraham knew at that point, and I think God knew at that point that He fully had Abraham.
Yeah,
His faith,
that's right.
His love, His
Finally.
dependence on Him. Finally,
yeah,
He had him where he needed to be.
yeah. And without that, the promise would have meant nothing.
Yep.
Abraham would have always been looking to something else or someone else or some way else that he could, but it was all over at that point.
And
It's a
maybe
remarkable story.
Abraham had fully faith in him by then, because he did give him that promise. Isaac was that promise.
Yeah, that's right.
And if he could do that, what else could he do?
That's yeah.
You know, so I think he fully had his full faith in him, his full dependence on him by that time. And that's all God wanted from him.
So verse 13, and I will also make a nation of the slave son because he is your offspring. So he makes a promise to Abraham and Sarah together, and Isaac is the child of that promise. And now he's making a promise to Abraham. Earlier he made it to Hagar, right? When she was in the desert. So the promise for both nations is complete. Early in the morning, Abram got up, took bread and a water skin, put them on Hagar's shoulders, and sent her and the boy away. She left and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she left the boy under one of the bushes and went and sat at a distance, about a bow shot away, for she said, I can't bear to watch the boy die. While she sat at a distance, she wept loudly. So this is a funeral wail, is what he's describing here.
You know, we just read in these two verses, but how long that trek had to be for he was already close to death in her eyes.
Yeah.
You know, we're thinking, oh, they just went out and just ran out, and you know, but it's no, they've already gone across. You know, and she's now thinking I'm fixing to lose my boy.
Yeah. That's a pretty good distance away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and all that she's been through, right?
Mm-hmm.
But God heard the boy crying. Before he heard, he couldn't have heard the boy before, he wasn't born. But he hears the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What's wrong, Hagar? Don't be afraid, for God has heard the boy crying from the place where he is. Get up, help the boy, and grasp his hand, for I will make him a great nation." So here we have another encounter with God through the angel, making a promise to her again. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well. All right. So whenever we find a well in the Old Testament, what are we looking at?
God's provision.
We're looking at life.
Yeah. He's making sure. Go over there and get you something
Yeah.
to drink.
So this is the second time. The first time she encountered God, it was by a well. And now here she is again. She opened her eyes and she saw a well. So it's like she's looking through her tears, and all at once she receives this comfort. And when the tears are wiped away, she sees everything that God has provided for her. So she went and filled the water skin and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew. He settled in the wilderness and became an archer. He settled in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got a wife for him from the land of Egypt.
She went back to her home.
Yeah.
And got some-
Yeah. So talking about extended family earlier. So there's the whole gist of that encounter. We see Sarah again. Her belligerence toward Hagar and Ishmael has resulted in him being a great nation. I remember who was Menachem Begin, and who was the Egyptian that negotiated the peace terms in Jimmy Carter's day? I cannot remember he was assassinated, and then
Yeah, I see it like 'cause he was sitting at a parade or something when they blew
gosh,
it
it was
away.
horrible
Yeah,
because he had made this deal.
yeah.
And I remember him saying that of course we must have peace because those are our brothers. And he stood on that and did not budge from that. It cost him his life probably. And it was the most, of all the political things that were being bannered about at that time, that was the most sincere statement of faith I'd ever heard an Egyptian make, or since. You just don't hear that kind of language. And really, that's going to be what saves the world. That's what brings peace, is when we acknowledge what God has already done in this, and we begin to work with Him in it. Like our study's been saying for the last,
Yeah, but we have to be careful of the one who's going to say peace, peace, and he's not going to be the real deal.
Yeah.
Well, yes.
I get what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah.
But we do know what peace looks like with God.
Yeah. So it's going to, so it'll be that kind of peace. of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
And so if you have, let's just take, what's just recently happened, with the whole Roe v. Wade thing and it being removed. Okay, so that's a very constitutional construct that they followed. What would have happened if one of them would have stood up and said, the six of us are doing this based on moral grounds and what we believe as being the will of God? What would have happened to this country then?
Talk about turmoil, huh?
Yeah,
Because some people are not wanting the will of God.
yeah, that's
They
right.
already don't like it. They really don't like it.
Right. So what we have, the point that I'm making is that when you do have someone stand up and say, this is based on more than just politics. This is a reality that God put, that's been a part of.
Then it's going to be the real peace.
Then there's going to be real peace. That you can't sidestep that and ever expect to have it. So I've heard all my life, you can't legislate morality. You can't make people do what's right. Well, we do that all the time.
Well, when we try to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we try to do
But
it.
most every law that we have, when
Yeah.
it comes to how we interact with each other,
It's
it's built on
based
some
law.
moral code.
Yeah.
You don't rape children.
Right.
You know, you just don't do those things. There's a morality to that right now is really being questioned.
Mm-hmm.
So where do we find the peace in that? You're not going to find it legislatively or even in the Constitution. It only comes from our understanding of what God is doing in the world.
People are going to have a heart change, and it won't matter what the laws of the land are.
That's
They'll
right.
do what's right.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And so that's what this is. This is God saying, I'm in control of what's right. Sarah, she's been promised to be the mother of a great nation. She has no voice in what's right. She keeps doing the wrong thing. I'm making it right. Well, how do we expect anything that is so blatantly wrong to ever be right? We let God have it, and it'll be right. But we can't see that. We're an advanced culture, according to most, and we're unable to see that. Well, why is that? Because there's a sense here that I've got to create my own safe space
We're our little
in order to
gods.
have my identity, my this, my that. That was Sarah's problem. This woman and her child are threatening me. They must be rid of. And in this case, God says, okay, we're going to do it that way for now, but this is what's in store. These are going to be two feuding brothers until they decide to come back to me and make it right. Really?
Yeah. And it's the same thing in our land. You know, if I'm just going to say the left and the right. If the left can wipe out the right, you know, no one's standing in the gap saying, this is wrong, this is sinful, let's just Sodom and Gomorrah, let's just, if it feels good, do it. Where would the land be if they totally wipe out any voice of God?
Yeah.
You know, would they just be so depraved and it's time to rain down fire and brimstone? And then, but here we are we going to just keep walking no matter how? And I think this week I was telling you in the truck, the adjustments that we have to make in our life, there might not always be easy adjustments, because we're going to say this is where the Lord's working, or this is where God is telling us to, whatever God's telling us to do, our personal life, our church life, just whatever, and it might not always be pleasing, you know, to everyone around. And so you just keep your mouth shut and keep going, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Very true.
So we've discovered tonight that God deals with those that we assume he has no relationship with.
He still loves and wants the best for them.
Yeah, and he still is working in ways that most of us would look at and say, in a dream, you know? Can't you be a little more direct than that, God, so we can experience it, we can see it and hear it and taste it and smell it? And no, God doesn't do those things either.
Well, that's like I was telling you about my son, you know, case of roast again, but I told him, I said, son, you have to rise up and be what your children are going to need. You have to have compassion, you know, because no matter what happens, I don't know the situation, and it's like, I don't think she can do this very many more times. We're probably going to be having a funeral, and you're going to have none of those children. And so then we need to stand up and love the families, you know, because he can, oh gosh, he can be so